I was fairly active, not totally fit, but fairly active. For instance, I would regularly go on a 6 mile hike just for pleasure, and maybe a 50-mile bike ride just because I enjoyed it. I moved into a new house, and within 6 months, I could no longer walk. And I eventually, within a year, I got to where I could not walk or talk. There were days where I would lay face down on the floor begging for the strength to get to my knees. And it was, nobody knew what was wrong with me. There was no answer. There was no diagnosis.
And now this is back, I think, in 2015 or 16, right?
15, 16, yeah.
So as you're going down, how many different doctors are you seeing here, Leroy?
I went to my GP, went to the emergency room. They did tons and tons of tests. They didn't find anything. I actually went to an endocrinologist that was actually right across the hall from me back then. And it cost me $700 for 5 minutes of his time. He said, "There's nothing wrong with you." I said, "But I can't walk." Went to an MD naturopath who suggested it might be EMF, like electrical fields from my house. So we did a lot of treatment there, and nothing was happening. And a mutual friend of ours recommended you, heard my story and recommended you, and we met. What impressed me when I met you is that wow, that's emotional. You sat with me for 90 minutes and listened to my story because it was important. And I've never had a medical professional do that.
Thank you. It always makes me upset when a doctor has a patient in front of them, they tell them everything's fine, when obviously everything was not fine. I remember this, you came into my office and really with I think it was a walker of some kind of thing. So you really couldn't
cane.
yourself, a cane. Yep. And I think you fell over at one point.
Probably. My left side was completely non-functional. I literally dragged my left leg around for 4 or 5 years with a cane in my right leg.
Yeah. And so it was very severe. I mean, and you'd been in, they checked you for stroke a dozen times. I mean, it was your story was fascinating and wild. And I was just remembered thinking, what happened to this guy? Like, what is this? And you mentioned it earlier, it happened within about 6 months of moving. Right. And we were eventually able to figure out this was a falling domino effect from mold.
Yeah, there was hidden mold in the ceiling of my office / man cave. I worked at home, and there was mold, and there was enough moisture in the ceiling that it was a petri dish on top of the sheetrock with no visible sign on the bottom of the sheetrock. And the sicker I got, the more time I spent lounging in that room, and it just cascaded. Turns out that entire house was a big petri dish, and who knew? I didn't know at that time how devastating mold can be. And then once we did testing, it was one of the most interesting molds.
Yes, you had the one called Chaetomium. I think the stocky boitress, which is the black mold, is the one everyone's a little more familiar with. But the Chaetomium is every bit as toxic as that black mold. That particular strain of mold is very, very neurotoxic. And that was really what you have, because you were, I mean, the neurological symptoms you had were, off the charts severe.
They were testing me for MS because it mimicked MS. Yeah.
Well, then, so let's fast forward here. So you found us, and we eventually figured out what it was mold. Did we find that out quickly, or what was the process once you found us and we started? Because I remember this was not fast.
No, I think we did a lot of testing and hypothesizing and those kinds of things. And eventually it came around, well, maybe we should look for mold. And I bought an infrared camera and I started poking around, and eventually found the mold in the house, had someone come out to verify it and do the testing. Yeah, so once we discovered that gave us something to look further into. and start exploring how do we deal with this. And the dealing with it was a long process. I
Well, it was hard to get rid of totally because we have to clean up you and the
right,
house. And
right.
you eventually moved, right? And that was a huge forward process for you, is when we actually moved out of the contaminated home, right?
We moved out of the contaminated home, but it was still, I believed, and we'll get to this later, but I believe that we were still in the typical biome that caused me problems. I did move. You sent me to New Mexico for a month to live while the house is being remediated. I came back to the almost remediated house and collapsed and moved immediately into a hotel. Um, and then found another home and spent the next, what, 2 years trying to get better in Minnesota. And ironically, I've always been fond of the mountains in the West. And and I took over those 2 years, I took about 10 trips, camping trips out west, where my wife at the time would have to pack me up, pour me into the Jeep. I didn't know if I would even be able to have the strength to fill up with gas at the first stop. And what was interesting about those trips is, for instance, I stopped in southern Minnesota one time. I had to drag my leg into the gas station to pay for gas. And 100 miles west, I stopped at Cabela's for a break. I threw my cane away and walked into Cabela's.
Yeah. I
And
remember
then I
you
was,
describing the way these trips went and going,
uh,
oh my goodness.
and I did this 10 times. I would come out west and all my symptoms would diminish. I remember going to New Mexico, and within about 3 days, I ran across a 6-lane highway. Uh, and then as soon as I would hit the Minnesota border, it wasn't the Minnesota border, but it was the biome, the humidity. Every single time I hit that region of topography, I would start slurring my words and my left side would stop working again. And so it was 10 times. And there was, I think the last trip out west was to Wyoming, and I spent 3 months out there. I couldn't walk in Minnesota. I was playing in Wyoming. I was hiking 10,000 foot peaks. I was playing basketball, playing racquetball, all that thing. And as soon as I crossed back into the Midwest, I couldn't walk or talk again. And so that's when I said it's time. And it's been transformative. That's not
You're
the
one of
only cure, but it was a big part of it. Getting outside of the biome that had caused me problems.
just because you have mold does not mean you have to move out of Minnesota. Although I've had two people with severe enough that was the case, and you are one of them, who just generally feel better if we're in the mountains, in a more in a drier place. It just
High
was,
desert.
yeah, the high desert, right? And it wasn't like we just moved out there. We had to get out of the mold. We had to support hormones. We had to support nutrients, all these detox pathways kind of things. But moving out was a big deal. But we were very excited because you got to come back to Minnesota recently to see your parents, right?
Right, right. And I was not symptomatic. I wouldn't want to test fate by spending forever in a humid climate, but I was fine. It was about a 6 day visit, and I was just fine. Yeah. So the last year and a half has been transformative. One of the other symptoms that came about was my sensitivity to chemicals. After I got out of the moldy house, I got extremely sensitive to chemicals, to the point where one whiff of an artificial chemical, uh, Axe deodorant, for instance, and I would, or even rubbing alcohol, and within 15 seconds I'd be flat on the floor, non-responsive, and it would take me 12 to 24 hours to recover. That
Yeah.
was at best inconvenient.
I remember you telling me a story. We had this chemical sensitivity, which comes often with mold because it's so hard on your liver, and we're in a big detox liver helping phase, and then your hormones get thrown off, and we're helping your hormones and things. But you had that chemical sensitivity, and I remember you really couldn't handle anything.
So I couldn't go into stores. I was completely
Yeah.
isolated. I would wear a big, huge pink painting respirator, even to go
The
to the
Darth
grocery
Vader
store.
mask. It looked like the
Yeah,
dark kind of the.
yeah, just to go to the store or just to be outside of my house, and had to make a lot of changes, getting rid of a lot of products that were scented and gone pretty much gone completely scent free. The good news is in the last year and a half, due to some changes in life and decisions I had to make, I've been able to train my limbic system that I can handle most any smell, and it's been transformative. So yeah.
Yeah, we've done so many things with you, but it's been fun to see you can smell things again. You can be around most things again. You're doing more. Right. Tell us a little bit about kind of the weight and activity level. So when you were sick, obviously we couldn't exercise, couldn't do things. And what
There
was
were
your weight at the highest? What is it now? And what's your activity? What's your activity level look like now, Leroy, as we're, through this?
so that's really interesting that I've been tracking my steps every day, the number of steps that I take every day as a proxy for my health. And when I was at my sickest, I might only get 200 or 300 steps in a day, and that was dragging my foot around. And ironically, I have a graph over the last 10 years that every time I would come out to the high desert, there's a peak. And we could show that to the listeners if you wanted to. There's a peak where my steps went from 200 or 300 to several thousand. And to make a long story short, now I put in at least 10,000 steps a day, and I've peaked out at I think 24,000 steps or 12 miles in hiking in the mountains, which is just amazing. I've got so much energy. Um, yeah, so there's the steps that I was, from a weight loss standpoint, I peaked at 290 pounds, which was uncomfortable at best. I I've lost 65 pounds. I'm down to 225. I'm pretty dense from a muscle standpoint, so I think I might hit 210 or 200 someday. But I feel
Yeah.
great. I've lost I've lost 10 inches in my belly, and
Wow.
I've had to buy two new sets of wardrobes, which I love clothes, so that's no big deal.
That hasn't been a problem. But Leroy, how I'm going to ask you kind of how old are you, Mister? You have energy and are hiking and are doing all these exciting things after being so sick. How old are you? Because I don't think people can tell just by looking at you.
No, no. Well, first I'll say that I have more energy than I've ever had in my life, even when I was 20 or 25. And I feel better. I feel stronger. I feel more vibrant, and I'm having the best time of my life. It probably doesn't show on video, but I'm actually 65. Will be 66 in May. So, and I'm hiking at 12,000 feet. I'm going bicycle riding, motorcycle riding. I was actually at Pikes Peak a few months ago, and one of our party was missing and the train was leaving. And so at 14,000 feet, I ran probably a quarter mile full speed,
It just
and it was fine. I was a little winded, but I mean, looking back 8 or 10 years or even 4 or 5 years ago, literally dragging my left leg around with a cane. And I have to remind myself how far I've come because it's hard to remember those days sometimes.
yeah, but it's been fun as you overcame one of the most severe mold poisonings I've ever seen or witnessed.
Mhm.
And really a testament when people tell me things like the nerves can't heal and you'll be this sick forever. And, I look at that and go, I've seen people like Leroy who, looked like he was having a stroke in my office and ER things and all these kinds of severe symptoms to where you couldn't move, you couldn't function. I mean, it was really bad too, working, living life, hiking, hobbies, social. I mean, all the things healing and getting back to living life. And so I look at your story and think it's inspirational, which is why I wanted to have you on.
Right. Yeah,
And
just to know people there is hope if you fight hard enough and search hard enough. One of my favorite cartoons, which I need to put on the wall somewhere, is there's a stork eating a frog, and the frog has his hands around the stork's neck as he's being eaten. and the caption is "Never give up," and that's the way I live my life. I think it helps to have some tenacity, and I could have made a choice of succumbing to common knowledge and saying I'm going to be this way forever, but I didn't want to do that. And I went searching for answers, and we found them together. And that's one thing I wanted to say about you, rather than being a provider who says do this, do that, is that it felt like we were on this journey together. And you would often say, here's what I've discovered, here's what I've learned. What do you think about this? Do you want to try this? And it was very collaborative, and it was, you were walking by my side the entire way. We've probably talked about roughly every 5 or 6 weeks for the last 8 years.
For a long
8 years.
time. I always
Yeah.
get surprised when I go look at this and go, oh yeah, that has been it's been some up and down, right? And I think that's also a story that people need to hear, is they always expect it to go smooth, and your case is very up and down. And I'm a big believer in, if we're tracking things and making sense of what's happening, we should over time get a pretty clear picture.
Yeah, I remember at my sickest, I was tracking everything. I was tracking everything that went in my mouth. We were doing labs regularly. I was tracking my blood sugar levels several times a day.
Yep.
I was tracking everything.
And what eventually ended up helping was the humidity, right? We eventually ended up figuring out, oh my gosh, every time the humidity drops, you did so much better, and every time the humidity came up, it was there. And that I think is what correlated more than anything else.
Mhm.
How well you were doing was, if it was a really dry day, you had a good day.
And what's interesting is in the last year, I've flown back to Minnesota, Wisconsin to visit family, and I've flown to Portland, which is also humid, without any ramifications. So I'm getting much, much stronger.
We were pleased. I remember you went to Portland and we were nervous. You told me we were on a
Very
visit.
nervous.
You said, Dr. Warren, I have a trip planned to Portland.
Honestly, I had gone through the grieving process of thinking that I may never see my parents again because I couldn't return. So last summer, when I returned for my mother's 90th birthday party, that was a big stepping stone.
That was a big win when you could come back and see your mom.
And Portland was kind of a test to see if humidity with a different biome would affect me. And it didn't. Went to the ocean and all that stuff. And then I was really nervous about coming back to the Midwest, and came with a traveling companion, primarily because I didn't know if I would be able to function once I stepped off the airplane. So, and it worked out very well. So,
Yeah. And we did some things to try and protect your system while you did it, but it went as great as we could have honestly hoped.
yeah,
And that's there.
yeah. So I hope this video can be a beacon of hope for people out there. I've been a part of some mold communities where people have just given up, and they're living in a van in the desert and trying to stay away from everything. And I get it. I was there. I was there emotionally too. I said, I'll do anything to be well again. And so I hope having this discussion can bring hope to people that you can get through this. It takes a lot of tenacity, a lot of work, a lot of research, and um, yeah, it can happen.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your story with us, and taking time out of your day to talk to me. Anything else you want to say to those who are sick and maybe feeling hopeless?
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I hope that my story can bring hope to people, because I know that there are a lot of people out there that have no hope, but thanks to tenacity and meeting you and walking through this journey with me, I'm a whole new person now. So I'm delighted to share my story. It's been an amazing journey.
Well, thank you, Leroy, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you.